Welcome to another edition of We Meditate's reading of the Vodoun Gnostic universe. An interdimensional exploration through the vehicle of quantum physics as studied by Dr. Reginald Crosley, a PhD medical doctor and Vodoun expert. I am your reader and host, Ahmad, aka Pharaoh Brown, and today, for this edition of the Vodoun Gnostic universe, we will be further delving into the nature of possession and the nature of the Loa. Let us begin. The crisis of possession, in and of itself, is a reversal in the structure of the tripartite composition of man. The IPN of the body and the soul of the individual are overtaken by a foreign entity. The mechanism is similar to that of dreams in the sense that the awareness systems of the person retreat, sink below the surface, leaving the leading role to the invading entity. In dreams, the individual's own double takes control, whereas in possession or adorcism, the foreign invading force overwhelms the entity of the devotee or adept. Here we must re-emphasize that the Loa or the Vodoun is not a metaphysical entity in the old acceptance of the term. The metaphysics is no longer a view of the mind, a product of the imagination. Metaphysics and spirituality refer to a heretofore unknown aspect of the physical realm, the world of invisible matter, the universe of the WIMPs or axions. So far, the only exception to that new definition is the nature of God, Yahweh, who belongs to an entirely different dimension, that of eternity. Eternity is that dimension which has no beginning, no end, no change, and is inhabited by one person, the eternal God. It is the opposite of space-time that has a beginning and will have an end, and that end is the beginning returning to its source, Yahweh. In essence of existence, the liberation from birth, death, rebirth, re-death, and the attainment of immortality in the heavenly paradise. Thus, everything in space-time or universe has a physical existence, be it energy, force, particle, fermions, bosons, axions, vodouns, Loa, soul, spirit, atoms, molecules, inorganic matter, organic matter, organisms, plants, animals, or humans. All these entities can exist as visible or invisible physical substances, or have a dual nature, or exist in those two places at the same time, or translate from one state to another. The Loa are referred to as force by the Vodou pundits and initiates. They are real, physical, invisible forces, having a dual nature, a wave particle nature, energy and axion physical entities. Henceforth, the materialistic dreams of the scientists like Dorseneville and Bigot have finally come true, but that alternate reality is queerer than they suppose. One onset of a crisis of possession is associated with the physical contact, a force field that is at the same time a psychic field. This is the psychic field of contact in the axionic entity. A person is being immersed or engulfed into a wave of energy. The contact is felt like that of a beam of light projected suddenly on your face with your eyes closed, or the heaviness of a heat wave one experiences in the hottest days of summer, or the paralyzing sensation on entering a very odd, freezing sub-zero temperature of the outdoors. Certain people describe it like a wind or water running upon the skin. Others compare it to the sensation one experiences when holding a magnet in the vicinity of an iron. That sensation is that of a physical attraction, a pulling towards a certain direction. The magnet, in fact, attracts iron and certain other materials by virtue of surrounding field of force produced by the motion of its atomic electrons and the alignment of its atoms. The invisible body or the Loa or Vodoun exerts a similar attraction on the organism of the target person or persons in the assembly, and that the attracting field can be experienced by more than one person at a time, the axionic body of the Loa being ubiquitous. That attraction can be resisted or blocked by certain individuals so that the people would speak about different degrees of possession. Some are brushed by the force field, some are made briefly drunken, saloi, and some are literally mounted, straddled, invaded in and out by the shadow or dark matter of the Vodoun. In the crisis of possession, the close encounter with the force that has ring described by Osirich or constraining character. There is a subjugating force that coerces the individual into submission in order to take control of that person's mind. When the invasion is completely established, the individual loses consciousness or enters a dreamlike state. The individual is like a somnambulist or someone under hypnosis. But this time, the reversal in dominance is done in favor of a foreign shadow matter. From the superficial contact of the onset, the invader progresses to enter the body through a target person. The penetration is done either from head or to toe or from toe to head. According to some parapsychologists, the invasion is done through the chakras of a person's aura. Those chakras are psychic centers distributed along the vertical axis of the body. There are 7 major ones: the base of the spine, Mulahara, the sex organs, Sadhisthana, solar plexus, Manipura, the heart, Anahata, the throat, Vistuta, the third eye, located where the eyebrows meet, Anja, and the crown, center top of the head, Sasahara. Energies are received through those chakras or psychic centers of the Samito and travel throughout it in an intermingling network of psychic channels, which were known to the ancient Hindus as nadis. In the Upanishads, it is stated that there are 72,000 of these channels, IPN, running throughout the astral body, Samito, in a complex matrix of interconnected channels that produce a balanced flow of energies. By invading the organism of the individual, the lower modulates the functioning of the nervous system, the somatic channels, the body as a whole, and the immediate surroundings of the person. The preferential portals of entry would be the neutral area, the heads and the legs. From there, the body snatcher spreads into the entire organism. It can be stipulated that if the Kirlian photography is applied to a possessed individual, dramatic changes can be observed throughout the layers of auras, which are a visual manifestation caused by the interactions between the dark matter or shadow matter of the individual and his ordinary invisible matter. According to Alfred Mitrou, an invasion by the lower is perceived by some possessed as a blow to the back of the neck, the neutral region, or a grabbing cramp in the same area that is felt like a bite. Others experience tingling sensations in the legs or the heaviness that rivets and limbs to the ground. That induction through the legs has been reported by Maya Deren, author of Divine Horsemen, in her own account of those close encounter with the lower Erzuli. Alfred Mitrou stresses the repeatability of the experience that can be observed like an experiment in a laboratory setting, so that the future physicians and other scientists, physicists, and spiritualists are in psychotronics can use EEG, Kirlian photography, thermography, and other fancy gadgets of modern technology to study the composite and superposition state of the possessed with or without hypnosis. Following the shock of induction or invasion by the body, snatcher or lower, the individual loses consciousness or his ordinary spatial temporal awareness. He is in a trance state. Some adepts or pundits of the Haitian alternate reality explain the composite state by a removal of the gross bon ange, Samito, from the body. The Samito has been chased away. This terminology is too strong in our opinion. The gross bon ange is not literally sent away, it is overshadowed by the axionic alien into a retreat, in such a way that its IPN is not in command of the individual. A person's soul and body are governed by the Vodoun in a superposition state that explains the struggle between the adept and the Vodoun at the onset of possession, a struggle that creates the symptomology, as seen as hysteria by Dorsenaville and others. Mitrou presents the clinical picture of the following manner. The possessed appears to have lost the control of their nervous system, particularly the motor aspect. They are shaken by spasmodic fits or convulsive seizures, When they stand up and jerk forward as propelled by a spring, make a sharp about face, then freeze for a moment with the trunk bent forward, stagger, totter, and regain their equilibrium, then stagger again, to finally enter a subdued trance. Other variants of this symptomology are observed, such as absence or petite mal type, or a generalized tremor, with shortness of breath and sweating. The face may have a painful expression. At times, the possession begins with a stupor or somnolence, a typical sleep induction phase. But soon this is followed by a hypnotic type of behavior, often accompanied by some convulsive seizures. The modalities of the crisis reflects the individuality of the Vodouns. The nefarious, bellicose Loa invades the body with the violence and fury of a hurricane. The benevolent Vodouns proceed through a smooth induction. The symptomology reflects also the degree of initiation of the adept. The rituals of Levertiti or Honsukanso prepare the devotees for such an encounter. The ill-prepared individual, or basal, that, like a wild horse, fights the invasion tooth and nail. The gesticulations are an attempt to get rid of that encircling magnetic force that is trying to subjugate them. The well-prepared initiate goes through the superposition state without struggle or rebellion. The assembly also plays an important role in protecting the individual in this moment of ritual. The assembly knows that this is not a masquerade, an imitation of hysterical type, or the Munchausen syndrome, a pathological lie. It takes steps to protect the possessed from the serious injuries that his reactions can produce, and also watches to protect the modesty of women. At the end of trance state, the individual has no recollection of his actions or deeds except the early phase of the attack. However, some people may recollect the ecstasy of a higher consciousness, something of a psychedelic nature, or something to the experience of the seers. According to Metro, the resistance or the induction of possession can be broken by the Hongun's intervention, which performs in front of a target person a dance while gazing in the manner of hypnosis. Some regular chawal or horses of the Vodouns can block the entrance of the alien into their physical being by some magical procedures to bind the lower or even him at a distance. This can be done with a special setting of the person's hair, or the special knot and scarf, or by placing a piece of wax at one end of the scarf. The great transparents, or the invisible WIMPs, that of the lower, are neutralized by some simple psychochemical procedures. They are still present in the vicinity of the target person, but can only create a slight daze or dazzle, or short-lived state of ecstasy described by the Suole by the Haitians. Another way to block the subjugation by the Vodoun is to remain seated with the arms crossed on the chest and to keep a mean appearance. It is like saying, "Beat it, sucker," or "Bug off, bozo." Karen McCarthy Brown, the author of Mama Loa, describes the first experience of a young girl, Maggie, in her very vivid manner, giving us a step-by-step invasion of a visible body by the invisible shadow matter. Maggie's consciousness captures the process by which she sees herself becoming progressively invisible, as Miss Invisible or the Invisible Woman. Progressively, the lower extremities fade away, then the arms, and then the entire body. At this point, the person loses consciousness and is completely dominated by the alien body. This is blackness or blackout. Maggie describes the invading force field as taking a shower and then thinning, and the thing that is running down and all over you, you feel like your feet are not touching the ground and your head is heavy. Maggie was 10 years old when she had her first encounter with the Loa. Being a smart aleck in New York City, there were people keeping constant vigilance, and Maggie tried her best to fight off possession and the surrender inherent in the trance state. Even a full-blown initiate to the degree of mambo or priestess, such as Maggie's mother, still finds it necessary to ward off possession as it can interfere with daily living activities. Lourdes was bedazzled by the exionic spirit at the age of 13. It was the Loa marionette that passed briefly through her head, but she sustained a full composite state at the age of 19. She reveals that after the first phase of induction, there were entities moving throughout her head, and she feels many, almost like a light or piece of paper. Thereafter, you pass out, but the spirit came and he talks to people. But when the spirit is in your body, in your head, you know nothing, as she quotes. Even for an accomplished initiate like a Lourdes, the induction of possession is associated with the struggle, not with the wild restiveness of basal, but that of a psychological resistance of an immune system to a foreign body. Thus, a Lourdes knows what to do to ease the entrance of the lower into her nervous systems. She uses a steady gaze at a light by narrowing her eyes. Also, during rituals into the percial of the humophore, the beats and rhythms of the drums open up the channels for a swift invasion by the invisible Vodoun. The narrowing of her eyes is also observed. Then her head flexes up her chest as if a weight were on the back of her neck. Karen Brown mentions that the spirits are said to straddle on the back of the neck. This is a portal of entry corresponding probably to one of the important chakras of the astral body or Samido. Then her face assumes the Vodou mask of Dorsenaville. She often staggers and requires support of the assembly. Soon the alien Samido is full control of her body, speech, and voice. Karen Brown describes the slow induction of a dorkism in a Lourdes basement altar room. There she gazed in the light along the altar. A slight tremor waved through her body intermittently. Then she closed her eyes tightly and shook one hand vigorously, like to get rid of a numbness or paresis. There is an analogy between her behavior and that of someone who is trying to resist somnolence by alternating wakefulness and sleepiness. From time to time, she emerges from below the surface of the waves of consciousness. The tremors follow a crescendo from barely perceptible to intensely shaking. This should be recognized as a variant of seizures. Unlike the typical spastic and cyclic phase of classical epilepsy, it should not be confused with the flailing of hysteria. With the cessation of the tremor, Lourdes stood up straight and directed keen black eyes at Karen Brown, the author, and she was in full superposition with Papa Ogu. As far as the induction and full composite state of possession are concerned, nothing can surpass the testimony of a researcher who, during the field study, was herself possessed by a Vodoun in many occasions and gives the first-hand account of the invasion of her body and soul by a dark matter entity. This is Maya Deren, the author of Divine Horsemen, The Living Gods of Haiti. She is Caucasian and of Russian ancestry, and she went to Haiti in 1947 with the purpose of filming a documentary of Haitian dances, but ended up writing a book on the irrefutable reality and impact of Vodoun mythology. She recorded, as humbly and accurately as she could, as a person of a different ethnicity, heredity, and culture, the logics of a reality that had forced her to recognize its integrity and to abandon her Western manipulators. As an artist, she was able to approach Haiti's alternate reality without quote-unquote scientific detachment of the professional anthropologist nurtured with the tenets of Galileo and his rationalist contemporaries of objective science. That renders him disinterested, non-participating observer, hoping to uncover a reality free from the subjective creations of the human mind. She was one of those intellectual descendants spoken of by Robert March in Physics for Poets, who were denying, like Andre Breton with his cohorts of poets, that any such separation was possible. The quantum principle of complementarity was at work in Deren's intellectual approach. Bohr's principle of Deren's intellectual approach. Bohr's principle of complementarity recognizes that there are multiple aspects of reality, and very often those aspects clash because the contrasting mental constructs of the appearance of reality, that many splendored thing, and the humanistic sciences and natural sciences are in fact compatible, and their conflict is only apparent. We are just dealing with a complex manifestation of the wave-particle duality. Deren was invited to participate as an observer in a Vodou ceremony in a well-known Hungoon. She had done her homework and understood what to expect from the Haitian alternate reality. She did not wish to be possessed, but to withdraw from attendance would be cowardice. She would resist the invasion of the shadow matter, but it must not flee or escape. That resistance comes from the reluctance to accept the loss of control, the loss of self or ego, to the benefit of an alien Semito. At one point during the ceremony, Deren decided to change places and to go toward her Haitian maid, who was also assisting the service Loa. She took 2 steps, but to her surprise, her left foot was rooted suddenly, numbly to the ground, pulling her forward. A bystander grasped her arm to prevent a fall and supported her firmly. Stunned, she froze momentarily in that posture, then tried to regain her balance and finally straightened out. She returned to her seat, still shaken by this abrupt brush with the Loa. Deren classifies this attack as an aura of possession. But it was more than an aura, because as she sat down, there was an unpleasant lightness in her head, as if the multiple structures and zones of the brain were being gently disconnected, and its integrating function or network coordination were being imperceptibly dispersed. That disruption in its IPN created little spaces of emptiness, or subtle thinning out of consciousness. She needed some fresh air, so she left the parasol for the moment and went outside to smoke a cigarette. On leaving the place, she noticed a transformation in her brain. The little spaces of emptiness were evaporating, allowing the brain to regain its unified integration, becoming solid once more. On returning into the humophore, she realized that the Hungoan Insard was possessed by the Vodoun Ogu. This was to be allowed by other persons in the assembly, falling prey to the ubiquitous nature of the Loa. A handshake with the left or a peer away in reverse can break the brain barrier and open the door to possession. Also, the vibrations of the drum beats can create the person a receptive state, probably by distorting the molecular or atomic structure of the organism, leaving more empty spaces to the avidity of the shadow matter entity. During a quote-unquote break of the mama drum, a man standing on the sidelines a few yards from Deren keeled over backwards as if struck by a blow. This is a surprise attack by the Loa, who can come on without warning. The bystanders of the man in time help prevent a fall. After a spastic phase, the body jerked violently. He stood up and sprang forward into the dance floor of the humophore. In the process, he bumped into a woman. That contact triggered a possession in the latter. She froze on one leg and then staggered abruptly into the tempo of the drums. The shadow matter entity in a fractal manner reproduces its characteristics in a very possessed individual. The departure of the Ogu, in a moment of rest, the chorus of Honsuis and the drums sang Vodoun or Zuli's song, riding a tidal wave of sound and surfing motion. Deren joined at the flow of Yanvalo rhythm and then rode forward that surf of sound with great delight. Soon the muscles of her calves and thighs became tired, and she was tempted to stop. She decided to hold, in spite of the fact that the air was becoming heavy and humid. She was gasping for air, and she could feel the pulsations of her heart beating at her temples. Her legs became very heavy, and the muscles were tender and spastic. But suddenly she became aware of change. The painful state was gone, and she was moving effortlessly, as if it were done through another dimension. With the pain gone, she realized that she could focus at leisure on the splendor of the drum beats to the silphied motion of her limbs. It was like an out-of-body experience, one in which she could observe herself, like that in a dream or in a mirror. She was in a magic kingdom of quantum land. She was everywhere and nowhere at the same time, she wrote. And she quotes, "I realize that it is no longer myself who I watch, yet it is myself. We are two made one again, joined by and upon the point of the left leg, which is rooted into the earth. End quote. Here, the portal of entry of Erzuli into the organism of Deren is at the left leg, the limb mentioned also by Matro and Maggie of Lola, as she started becoming the invisible woman from the legs up. Deren was experienced a magnetic sensation, the strong pull created by the magnet of proximity of the iron and metals, manifestation of the physical presence of invisible matter of the axionic Vodoun. That force coming from the ground or from a subterranean pool or realm was giving up outside and deep inside that leg of the manner of blood circulation. That strange numbness described by Deren is a variant of the sensation created by an anti-gravity pull that can lift the person above the ground into the air, or isolate her flesh against the ravage of fire, or rivet her to the ground in a paradoxical manner. This is a way to express the feeling of being engulfed into a force field or axionic field from WIMPs, has become strongly interacting with massive particles. In Adorcism, at the level of simple crises of possession, the WIMPs remain invisible, non-detectable by electromagnetic means, but they exhibit their force of gravity, that property that has allowed astronomers to detect the presence of dark or shadow matter in the universe. And we should remember that shadow matter constitutes 86% of the total mass of the universe. Here, the principle of complementarity or duality is manifested in the two states of WIMPs and SIMPs, like the particle and wave function paradox. The ordinary circumstances, the Vodoun WIMPs do not disturb our atoms or molecular structures. They go through us like a radio, wave, or an X-ray. But in possession, they make themselves manifest in a tangible manner and enter into a composite or superposition state with our ordinary matter. How is this accomplished? We don't know the details yet, but the analogy of the wave-particle duality can help fathom this weird reality. The principle of correspondence is also at play in Adorcism in the two sets of laws, Newtonian and quantum, as they correspond or overlap. As far as we know, there exists no Curlian photography of a person possessed by a Loa. That would be a part of the future research studies in psychotronics. The photography is not the picture of a shadow clone in and of itself. It is the picture of the aura, which is a resultant phenomenon from the interactions between the WIMPs and the visible body. The aura is visible because it falls into category of substances detectable by electromagnetic infrared means and the like. As the force field moving up from the leg invaded her whole body, Deren let herself go. It was at this point she experienced again what would be called supersymmetric duality. She saw herself as a double, two parallel selves like in a mirror. One of her parallel selves was watching the other, and soon the vision of the watcher began to flicker, leaving gaps of the invisibility that were getting wider and greater. The other self was dancing one and changing places after each gap. The gaps were like moments of unconsciousness. This was like alternating between wakefulness and sleepiness, and it felt like she was going to get lost in an empty space, altogether lost in a dead space at a dead time. The repetitive, pompous, material, cavalcading beats of the drum led to the elation, exhaustion, and also the vigilance of the adept is put to rest. The psychic brain barrier is dissolved, leaving the individual wide open for an invasion of his body and inner self. The shield remains lower, even the breaks period, rendering the adept and the guest vulnerable to the onslaught of the Vodouns. Vibrating like a tuning fork under the drum beats, the subject saw herself double for 1 minute and single the next. She had entered the zone of higher consciousness dominated by the principles of quantum wave and function. From time to time, the invading entity would stress its power or gravity of that leg, portal of entry, and send some axionic waves towards the brain and entire organism. Deren described it as rooting of the leg, and incoming waves were intoxicating and creating a high and increased the perception of alternate realities, or the psychedelic surreality, where a forward lean becomes a long fall across space. Her vibrating skull became one with the drum, and the singing and the beats were metamorphoses of her own ear, and the vibrations came from inside her head. The loa and she were in a composite state with the voices and the drum beat. She was drowned in a sea of axionic waves. Her boundaries were confounded with that of this dimension. And that was not an abstraction, a psychoid phenomenon, or an imaginal figment. It was the encircling presence of a physical brain that has passed from weakly interacting to strongly interacting massive particles, so that she felt like this was encased in a cylinder or a well of sound, that cylinder or well of sound was the whole cosmos. There was nothing anywhere except this, and there is no way out. Maya Deren was living in the Badurilian correspondences of communicating vast to the surrealists. The universe of Castadena under Mascalino, when invading shadow matter, overwhelmed her entire person, creating a paradoxical vision of light called white darkness. It was in the shadow or dark matter has become luminescent, and the white darkness was moving through her like a swift rising tide. She was dealing with the tangible force, a physical power field that produces a ring of ostrich, or a coercive magnetic light. She cried for relief or mercy, but it was like an orgasmic rapture. The shadow matter entity flooded through her body, reaching her head and engulfed her. She was sucked down and exploded upward at once. She was totally possessed by Urzuli, and in that state she was experiencing as light. It was an audible light, and invisible but very bright, in scanning the void for substance to fix upon and to become upon the substance of light. Some describe similar phenomenon in the trance state during his initiation in Upper Volta. Not some, Somé. He experienced the unbroken wholeness of the universe, which reveals itself to be pant-vitalism. He would feel that life was pulsating in everything around him and underneath him, and even the smallest speck of dirt. Sounds were blue and green, and colors were very loud. The dark matter field of the Vodoun enwrapped Deren as if she was inside of a deep down sunken well. She was at the bottom of that field, and every molecule of her body and brain anguished to move out of that well, but she could not do so on her own choosing. Soon she was drawn up by the sound's power, slowly was lifted on the beam of shadow matter, and was like coming out of the bottom of the sea in a crescendo matter, faster, swifter, and higher. The composite sound grew stronger, tighter, louder, and louder. It became a thundering clamor, a clanging bell, a deafening sound, and then suddenly surfaced. It was a new zone with air and light similar to that reported by the victims of cardiac arrest, brought back to life by CPR. In that light, the world looked clearer. Deren saw something at once: quantum ubiquity, instantaneous propagation, and like Schrödinger, she was the whole universe. In my view of the world, the physicist declares, I am the east, I am the west, I am below, I am above, I am the whole. All in all, it is an immediate knowledge of things without the mediation of eyes, nose, and other senses. She was looking at the essence of things, but soon those Platonic archetypes were modulated into meanings, became the night, the parasal, the Honzukanso, the Hongun, and the bystanders. Deren, who never had a regular initiation or simple lavete, was possessed by the Vodoun Urzuli 7 or 8 times. She was mounted once by the lower loco, and as Azarka threatened the head of number times. She was more attracted to the personality of the Vodungere, but she was never possessed by that entity. Once she was possessed by Urzuli in the very inappropriate time. The period was when the loa was installed in a composite state with her, and a complete blank in her memory. When she regained consciousness, about 4 hours had elapsed. She was informed that she was a very lucky woman, since Urzuli herself had performed a complete drum ceremony. She was in the process of accomplishing. Another adept of the Vodoun alternate reality is Claude Plesson, a Frenchman initiated in Honzun, Haiti. His book, Le Voodoo, published in Paris 1987, is a great value of first-hand testimony of another Caucasian without the background used by scholars, physicians, and other resources to explain the manifestations of crisis and possession. One of his dramatic possessions occurred at Saltidel. And the Vodoun Pilgrimage Center. He had climbed near the top of the cascade, and at the height of about 12 meters, when he was suddenly grabbed in the back of his neck by a magnetic hand that pushed him downward into the waters. He passed out with the forceful entry of the axionic force in the neutral area, and when he regained consciousness, he was in the waters, supported by other people, such as Mambo Matilda Bouvier. He did not experience any fear or injury. In his observations, Planson proved beyond any doubt that the experience of slavery and the mistreatment of blacks in America had nothing to do with the crisis of possession. It is a universal phenomenon experienced by all racial groups that come into constant contact with axionic entities. In Paris in 1966, Planson and a group of Haitians presented to the Caucasian public an authentic voodoo ceremony for about a period of 2 weeks. Planson and friends wanted the ceremonies to be just an artistic performance for 200 or 300 spectators assembled in a large tent in Paris called Aile des Puertos. To their amazement, there were episodes of possession every night among the Caucasian spectators. The Loa had possessed the white people, and the white people could easily be identified, be it Ogul, Dambala, Azaka, etc. There was no place for the usual explanation of hysteria, neurosis, or slaves trying to regain their human value, or the reproduction of a learned behavior taught by infancy or adulthood. Among the possessed were a psychologist, an accountant, a mechanographer, and a student in architecture. They all lost consciousness under the onslaught of the shadowy entities. It was a basal attack that overwhelms atheists, Catholics, and practicing Jews. The description of Adorcism given by the Caucasians was similar to that reported of Maggie, Adors, and Deren. Out of the blue came a fainting sensation, a loss of equilibrium, and an attempt to regain one's own balance. Then there was a magnetic force, field enwrapped in a subject, taking possession of his whole body. There was that power that pressed upon the back of the neck. The hands became heavy, and the subject attempted to shake to get rid of that sensation, described as having gloves made up of lead. To that point, the individual was conscious and observing the transformations. His body was becoming fuzzy and fuzzier, and the perception that reminds one of Maggie's Invisible Woman. Then he came to the sensation of falling into that empty space, the space of unconsciousness. During that time of obliteration of his Samido or Gros Bon Ange by the axionic Vodoun, the individual showed strength that goes beyond ordinary capabilities. When the composite state dissipates, the subject has to get from the spectators an account of his behavior. The African Haitian alternate reality and that of the Cuban Santeria share the same great assault. Planson attended a Vodou service by an old and celebrated priestess of Santeria in Havana in the beginning of Fidel Castro's regime. In that visit to Cuba, he was accompanied by Matilda Bouvier and other adepts, and the company introduced to Havanian, Mambo, and some Cuban officials. The priestess greeted everyone with a handshake and a dual composite handshake that sent a strong magnetic zap through the body of each visitor. They jumped as if they were put into contact with an electric current, and some of them even rolled to the ground. Pinson went through the same ordeal. A strong force seized his arm and gradually invaded his whole body until he was released. From the preceding assessment of crisis possession, we can caution researchers, physicians, physicists, philosophers, theologians, and anthropologists against any empty statements of psychoid phenomenon, imaginal realm, visionary rumors, or hysteria or hysterical mimicry. Psychological flight from the unbearable condition, such as slavery or apartheid, or a schizoid search for self-worth. Furthermore, we don't even want to consider this book the question of predestination, tricks, or pure quackery. This always enters into different diagnoses contributed by every physician facing every syndrome. We wanted to pursue our own inquiry to the alternate reality and eliminate perception, crafty expedience, and artificiality, and to zero in on the non-ordinary aspect of this truth. It will be beneficial to any Western-minded thinker or researcher to keep a personal brush with the alternate reality or shadow matter or axionic forces before making any doctoral judgment. They should approach this parallel universe in the human form as a laboratory setting, and they should touch the Vodoun or be touched by them. They should avoid whimsical deductions from ivory tower research, and although the contact or approach of the Vodouns can be very scary or dangerous, the researchers must be bold and courageous in their search for many splendid things of this reality. And this concludes our edition of the Vodoun Gnostic Universe. As we have unpacked, we've discussed more about the nature of the Loa and how the possession ritual takes place, and also touched upon some of the universality of the nature of the Loa, how, when exposed to the right ritual settings, possession can take place in anyone. Again, I am your reader, Ahmad, aka Pharaoh Brown, and this is We Meditate, reading the Vodoun Gnostic Universe by Dr. Reginald Crosley. Be well, family.